going through the period of depression allowed me to talk to openly and honestly to other artists and aspiring artists and just anyone really. I'm quite open about it and be like, this is life. Like, this is what we go through. Working in the creative industries, there's a lot of pressure on us. And if we are in a bad headspace, it's so much harder to create than I'd say some other careers where you can almost be on like autopilot. Whereas creatives, if we're given a design task and we're facing depression and experiencing that, there's a big part of translating the task that we've been given, translating it in our brain and expressing ourselves on paper that's missing. So I'm grateful that I've come through it, been able to talk about it, but also now I'm very aware of like when I have those moments, if I feel like I'm slipping and I'm going down a spiral, or if I can see someone else displaying the same sort of characteristics and I guess like symptoms of depression that I started to have, or someone in the danger zone of like spending 12 hours a day doing art and not socializing and being isolated, like I can point that out, I can call it out and say like, look after yourself.
How far are you willing to go to help fellow artists? This is something we discuss in today's episode with concept artist and designer Mel Cummings, who is a creative who does just that. Mel loves the endless possibilities of design, and working in TV and games, Mel has contributed her talents to titles such as Marvel's Secret Invasion, PUBG, Apex Legends, and many more. And when not developing a design craft, Mel spends a considerable amount of time helping up-and-coming artists through lectures and workshops. So in this episode, we discover why it is critical to nurture your design skills, why helping others is important for your own growth as an artist, and how mental health can impact you as a creative. As Mel candidly shares her journey with battling and dealing with her own mental health, plus much more. Let's go. Welcome back to the Learn Squared podcast, and I'm delighted to welcome our very special guest today, Mel Cummings. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me.
So glad to chat with you today. We've known each other for quite a while now, not to age ourselves, but I'm looking forward to speaking to you today, I guess, on the podcast. To let everybody know, before we begin, I'll be grateful if you could let us know who you are and what you do.
Sure, yeah. So I am a concept artist. I'm a freelancer. I've been doing it since 2016. And like Aaron, I love all mechanical stuff. So I focus on vehicles and props, any of that juicy, hard surface stuff. That is me. That is what I love. Yeah, and I guess I love cars. I love vehicles. My favourites are probably like the old muscle cars. And that was a big influence for me in taking the career path that I took. Wow. And my focus now. So yeah.
Sick. So was it a passion of particularly cars that led you to this career path, or did you kind of know that I'm going to be a concept artist and then the hobbies kind of aligned altogether?
Not quite. I love to tell people, like, explain the fact that so if you were to look at my CV, you'd see like I started out in one direction and then I went a different direction. Mm-hmm. So when I was younger, I loved video games. Tomb Raider was one of my first AAA games, Tomb Raider 2 on the PC. Sick. Those good graphics back in the day. I absolutely loved it, but I didn't know you could work in video games. So then my other love, as I said, the voice vehicles, absolutely loved it. Pimp My Ride was my show. And I want to do that job. If you don't know Pimp My Ride, you need to go and search on YouTube. It's just it's such a legendary show from the 2000s. Yeah, I loved it. It's basically taking old cars that are in disrepair and destroyed. And then what they would call pimping is basically making it look like a car from Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you remember the show, Aaron?
Of course. I grew up on that stuff, man. What was your favorite bit about Pimp My Ride, though? Was it because there's a particular stages, right? There's the whole thing of the whole theater at the beginning of how trash the vehicle was, and they found the most extreme people with the most extreme vehicles for the most nonsense reasons of why it is. Then there was the whole like
Yeah.
figuring it out, then building it, and then the reveal. What was your favorite bit of it?
I think seeing them as they were building these extra elements on the car, and they would reveal some of it to the camera and be like, oh, we know that such and such really likes hot tubs, so we put a hot tub in the back of the car. Yeah. And like I loved like those little reveals. I guess like that was the parts that I really enjoyed, because it was the little details that you would see, and then they would get the different guys from the shop to come over and explain what they've been doing.
Yeah,
they always seem to be fabricating something and adding carbon fiber here and adding a TV screen there. Like I love that part. Yeah. What about you?
Same. It was the whole bit where you actually saw some like design and you actually saw some like problem solving, and of course gadgets, screens. I remember every episode there's a whole lot of plexiglass for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of like, there's like one guy who goes, okay, I'm just gonna, what my decision is, everyone says, yeah, we're gonna add this, and every episode he goes, I'm adding plexiglass, and that was it. It looked great, it was fine. Obviously a lot of subwoofers. I never had one in my cars at the time, but a lot of my friends and cousins and stuff, like having a sub in the back of your car was like, what is it called? Just a rite of passage or whatever. Like it was like you had to, you weren't nobody instead of sub in your car. So it was all that culture. Need for Speed, the game was out at the time. Obviously, Fast and Furious, all that was the influence. Neon and Nitrous. I'm sure it's still the same now, but yes, nostalgia. You definitely hit me with a nostalgia bomb there. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, exactly. So that was literally what I got enthusiastic about that, and I was like, I'd love to do that job and doing all the design, not necessarily building, but the design side of it. But I went to an all-girls grammar school and like trying to explain, okay, I want to design vehicles that kind of look like these ones from Fast and Furious, where their focus was more on like sciences and law and that sort of career direction. So I was kind of like, well, I have no idea what to do. The careers people, they as well were struggling. So I thought, well, the closest thing I could do is transport design. I went to engineering first. That was like my first thought.
Same.
And then the person that I spoke to at one of the university, they were like, actually, I think you're more suited for design. And so that's what I decided to do, and went and did transport design at Coffee Uni or Coventry Uni here in the UK. It was an interesting, I guess, journey to get to there, because it was kind of like once I got to there, then I was like, yeah, this isn't even what I want to do, which was really interesting. Coventry University helped me get to decide that I didn't want to do what I wanted to do.
Wow.
And I guess like the way that came about was like Coventry University, in the library, they had the books of Sid Mead, Scott Robertson, Daniel Simon, and then they had the DVDs, the Gnomon Workshop DVDs, with Feng Ju, and I think there was a one by Sid Mead where he did like some traditional painting. And I would like, me and my friend Tom, we would like hire the books out between us, because I think they were on like short loan. So like one of us would take them out, then bring it back, and then they would take it out. Like just between the two of us, we would try and hold them for as long as possible. And looking through those books, I was like, actually, like if I can take what I could learn doing car design and apply it to video games, which is my other love, and film and TV, like that is where I want to go, because you can explore more. When you work in car design, or when you're doing car design, you quickly start to learn that every vehicle needs to fit the 95th percentile German males, the biggest of the UK, of the global population in size, and then the smallest in the population in size. And I was like, oh, I don't really like this. I want to design a car that looks so cool and maybe flies and does all this. You can't do that. So that was like the turning point for me. So I don't know if you had a similar experience when you had a realization.
Almost exactly the same. I did the same. I was directed to the same course like yourself, engineering, because it's interesting, because I think at the time we were like you said, structurally, I guess in terms of career paths or whatever, what people knew about, what the courses were about, especially from like, I guess, high school to college to university, whatever paths they saw, firstly, they didn't know what we wanted to do. We knew what we wanted to do. They didn't have something like that was direct. And
Yeah.
it was interesting because by the sounds of it from yourself as well, and I didn't know that about yourself. I know most of it, but not that particular element. And it's weird that we had the same kind of thing. And it was like, yeah, I remember having multiple conversations with different career people from like different stages, from like, you know, high school to college or whatever. And I go, this is I was very specific, not a case of I'm not sure what I want to do, whatever. This is what I want to do. How do I do it? They didn't know. So fair play to them that they didn't turn me away. They said, try this, try this, try this. And yeah, ultimately I got directed towards engineering because it's something that's like, again, a salary type thing. You can get a job and stuff. But I remember doing it and it was not for me. Although I wish I'd finished it because some of that knowledge would definitely help me now as a designer if I just knew some of those core things. And it's interesting because back then it wasn't appealing to me, but now I'm excited to maybe I wish I understood some of those equations or could make my own kind of equations and stuff and figure it out. But yeah, that's a side issue. And yeah, I remember like almost having to do 2 courses because when I found out about Cov Uni, then I found out I needed a portfolio because I spent almost 2 years in the engineering course. I had no portfolio. So I did an art course, not college, and they got me in. And then I got to uni, and I like how you worded it. I've never known how to articulate it best myself, but the way you said it, like going to uni, showed you that you didn't kind of want to do that, but you want to do something else. What year did you go there?
So I think it's 2008.
So I graduated in 2010. So 2006 or 7, I think I went there. But I don't remember at the library those Sid Mead books and DVDs. The only ones that I used to try and hoard and have it on my constant borrowed list was the Nothing But Mech books. They had those there. And, I think it was the 3D Art magazine or 3D Artist. There's a couple of magazines that was dedicated to that. And that's all I like leached off, like whatever little tidbits from there. And there was, I did a course, I did a placement at uni for the 3rd year, and that really opened my eyes to that. So I'm glad they started adding that. But yeah, I want to know when that was because I remember when I was being there, I never saw those. And I'm quite envious, to be honest with you.
Well, it's really interesting because I think a lot of the content in the library, like if we were to look at what's available online now with like ArtStation and so many other websites, there is so much art out there for you to see and to learn from and to be inspired by. And back then it was like the 3D World magazine that you would have to like read through and be inspired by, some books. And I think at that time CG Hub was about, but then I think it closed down.
So. Yeah.
Like, so it's like there was very few places for us to get inspired and figure out where we could take our passions and direct it into a career. So yeah, it's interesting that you had a similar experience in the library.
I know, and I think it's telling that our experiences are almost identical. Like, we definitely known each other. We both went to the same university. We both had the same career path they wanted to take. Yeah, I guess maybe our educational system here in the UK kind of just funneled us into that particular path, which looking back now, I definitely would like it if it was different, but I don't mind it. I accept it because I definitely learned some things that perhaps I wouldn't have. I definitely went on my career path isn't like a straight vector. It's like a squiggle and some sharp right angles along the way. But looking back now, like, would you have it any other different way, or are you kind of happy? And I guess maybe happy is maybe too strong of a statement to summarize it in. But yeah, like, what's your feeling about your career, how it's progressed now, knowing the path that you took versus if you started today, how your path would be? If that makes sense.
I think overall, on reflection, I'm happy I went to university. I'm happy I took the path I did when I was to university and then through university, because I think there's a lot of things that you at that time you'd learn at university which would be hard to come across anywhere else. For example, just like understanding how to break down the design and consider like ergonomic features and interactivity, and then also even just presentation. and knowing how to go through that process of going from like really rough thumbnails to a final design that's been developed and then shaped and tells a story and explains a concept, and then you have a mood board. Like those are really, at that time it was so hard to find like a book that would be like, well, this is how you become a concept artist or a car designer. So I think if I hadn't gone to uni, I don't know if I would have discovered Sid Mead and Scott Robertson. Like I think that is interesting to think about. I did always have this desire when I was at uni. I was like, oh, I wish I'd gone to art centre. Like that was always what I was thinking. I was like, because of, you know, you're in second year of university, and you know that like the path that you're on at university isn't the path that you want to be on. And you're like, well, where else does like what you are hungry for? And it was art centre at that time, and I was like, I just wish I was there. But obviously, it wasn't going to happen because I needed to finish my degree. So I'm grateful for what I learned in that process. I wish that I had had a greater understanding of design, and that had been drawn out more, because I think it's so important to what we do as concept artists. We are not just painting pretty pictures as much as some people think. It is about design at the end of the day. And I think if I had had that better understanding from being at university, I think my career path may have gone slightly differently. Maybe it would have been, maybe we'll talk about it later, but maybe I would have missed some of the holes that I fell into, and wouldn't have had to like grind so much when I came out of university. So I think that upon reflection, overall, happy that I went to university. Just wish some of it would have been different.
So when you got to uni, did you, like, what was your expectation? Like, did you kind of go in thinking, okay, how do I use this to get into entertainment design? Or were you even aware of entertainment design at that time?
No. So I wasn't aware. So up until I got to university and had that moment in the library, and with like Sid Mead, Simon, Scott Robertson, I had no idea. So for me, it was like, oh, I had this idea, still Pimp My Ride. That was my focus. And I felt like this was what I needed to do. But I remember in the first year, like one of the first vehicles I designed was like this, it would have been like a massive snow, community snow vehicle, but it was the shape of a dragonfly. And like that already is so far from like designing the next VW Golf. Like,
of course.
It's just straight away, like it seemed quite apparent to other people that I wasn't meant to be a traditional car designer, even a Pimp My Ride car designer, but something that was a little bit more, I guess, like blue sky thinking, and didn't have to play as much to engineering considerations. So yeah.
Just to confirm, it was the moment you opened those books that really just like shone the light on the path that you wanted to go on, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it became like just, you know, you look at Sid Mead's work, and like he used mostly traditional materials, so you know, pens, markers, and like that was my love. I love traditional. Exactly. So you look at him, you're like, okay, how am I going to draw like Sid Mead? So like that was my focus. Scott Robertson, how am I going to draw and design like Scott Robertson? How am I going to design like Daniel Simon? So like that was the turning point, and I held on to that because I was like, this is what I want to do. Like this is what I see as being really exciting for me, and not necessarily looking at the next car that's going to be on the road in the next 4 years. So
my gateway drug was specifically Daniel Simon's Cosmic Motors. It wasn't in the library at the time, but someone had bought it and brought it in, and that was on the placement thing that we did, and that was more like, I didn't realize I was doing it, but that was more concept art at the time. On that project, we did do a dragonfly as well. We did like futuristic insect type things.
Nice.
And it was all that kind of stuff. So that was the only time I really thrived throughout the whole, I did have other moments, but I really thrived in that particular setting. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was purely because it was completely calibrated to the way I wanted to create and the kind of environment I wanted to create. Unlike you said, blue sky thinking. And yeah, when someone showed me that, I remember that's it. Like think of a film, all the light went black at the back, the spotlight shone on me on this book, and then it was just like, what am I seeing? This is insane. I'm sure there's like, that's happened in movies. There's a famous scene where that happens. Or yeah, that was my Ratatouille moment, but in reverse. Like I saw my future after seeing that book, and that was it. I was like, this is it. And similar, did they in the first year, did they do that thing where I think for the first few weeks of the first term, they said pick someone else, some other artists like render and recreate it? Like doing like at that time it was like you use markers or whatever. Did they make you do that when you started off?
I don't specifically remember that.
Okay.
No, I think it was kind of like draw loads of ellipses.
Sure.
And figure it out.
Okay. The reason why I mentioned that, because I think on the first time everyone did a car, obviously, he was doing car designers, and I think at the time, because you thought this is what the course was, like you're supposed to do what it is. Well, I remember my path at the time was like, okay, yes, I want to get into a job that pays me and makes me design cars. And don't get me wrong, I think car design is fascinating and it's still cool to this day. But my ulterior motive was like, but I want to get to a level of status, because that's how you had to do it. So I could be allowed to design things like the iRobot car or the car Minority Report at the time, the Lexus and all that kind of stuff. I was like, that's what I want to do. I didn't realize you could kind of go straight there. You had to like be some qualified designer at a company and then they pick you that way. But yeah, the first week I did a car. The second week I found this, I don't remember what it was, but it's a spaceship thing. I did that. So I think, like yourself, I was like respectfully rebellious, thinking that I need to do something that I think is way cooler, or at least what I find, I guess, I don't know, just I found more interesting or more compelling for me to do. And yeah, I think my first assignment, I didn't do a car. I did like some futuristic train bus thing. And then I think I only did one car, and that was on my final project, but I did that to play safe, and it was an absolute shit show. Like that still haunts me to this day. But I'm gonna revisit it one day and do it proper. But yeah, I wanted to figure out like what it was like for you at the time. But I'm kind of glad that we kind of experienced similar things. Because I guess it highlights something that is not as necessarily a case of like anything in particular is responsible, but I think it's also important to show that it does help, or maybe not, but I guess it does help when there is a career path or a pathway already set out for you to kind of do what you want to do. But equally, it kind of shows you that if there isn't, you kind of still find your way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think because it's rarely that I talk with concept artists where they're like, yeah, right, I knew I wanted to do it and I went straight into it and it was all success and it was all a beautiful climb on a mountain. Like that was the career dream. It's often like, okay, well, we started at this place and then this happened and I realized this and then I had to try and apply for this job to do so that I could earn money while I was still trying. Like it's never like a beautiful picture. It's always like there's some interesting journey that somebody's taken. But I think that's what makes us really interesting as concept artists, because we're not all coming from the same background. We're not all coming, like there's people that I know who came from mechanical engineering and then went to do concept art, and like it makes their designs then really interesting because they have such a focus and a I guess like an element of this really interesting deep understanding of mechanics and movement, which say someone like me I wouldn't have, but I would have maybe more of a focus on vehicles and understanding how that works. So yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing that the concept art industry is so mixed with people's career paths.
Yes. And I think that's one thing that I find appealing. And I think that's what I always found appealing about entertainment design as well, is the variety. Like just take IPs that we've seen growing up. When you kind of look at it, yes, there's a lot of similar tropes and a lot of similar things that kind of fall into the similar pockets, but there's still many, every era, every decade, there's something iconic designed, at least one thing, if not multiple things. And it just shows that there is room, and there always will be room. And it's like a challenge as well to kind of like always find that new thing, almost like discovering a new color. Like you can't imagine a new color because you only know what's in front of you. But then when you see it, you know it's new. What excites you? You kind of touched upon it already, but what excites you about design overall?
Um, so I guess it's probably like the way that my brain works. Is I love understanding how something works. So like being neurodiverse, I'm like give me something to like break down and understand like the intricacies of how it works. And for me, that's anything mechanical. I'm like, I need to understand how this works and like the details that nobody else really pays attention to. I love that. And that's what helps fuel my love for design a lot of the time. And like finding just the strangest things and being just like, oh, like this is really interesting. And you know, you go, I don't know if you have the same experience of where you just go down the rabbit hole of like discovering how something works, and then like half an hour later you're like on some rabbit hole on YouTube watching random videos of like and just the craziest stuff. And I think there's so much out there to design. There is so much out there to learn from, that's what keeps me like energized and going with design. And just knowing that it's different, where our career is very different to other jobs where you might reach, say, a point where you're saying, I've achieved all the career milestones I wanted to achieve, and there's really nothing else for me to do apart from maybe go and set up my own business. With us, it's kind of in the creative field. There's always something we can design that we've never designed before. It just takes the creative eye to see the opportunity. So I think that to me is exciting. Like, yeah, to know that you can just be something can be thrown your way and be like told to design it. You never designed it before. And then you go on the research rabbit hole. So that's fun for me.
Yeah, rabbit holes are equally as dangerous as they are fun. I get stuck in them often, and you have to keep calling rescue services to take me out of there because sometimes I do get stuck. But I like your analogy there. Like, I've just realized that, yeah, that's for me as well. I like the fact that there's like unlimited possibilities. I love my games. I actually like single player games, and I like that the story completes. But honestly, I don't like it when games finish, especially ones that I really enjoy. I want to keep playing it and experiencing it all the time. And that's what I like ultimately about creativity in general. Like, obviously, particularly like concept art and design, because like you just said, like you can just keep going and going and going and going and going. And for others, I'm sure they would be like, that just sounds completely insane and not for me. But for me, that sounds like heaven. Just constantly just
exactly, yeah, especially if you mash, like, even if you took the same thing and have to design it over and over again, all you have to do really is change certain themes, like the combination of the themes, and then you've got something new to design and a new rabbit hole to go down. So like, yeah, to me it's so exciting.
What's your most recent rabbit hole or current rabbit hole?
Looking at broadcasting or news trucks and like seeing how they're used and seeing the different sizes and the satellite dishes, and then what they look like inside, and then almost looks like a little space station inside some of them. And that's been an interesting rabbit hole to go down. Just because it's like, from the outside, it's just a van, right? If you ignore the satellite dish. And then on the inside, it's like a whole nother little world that opens up. Yeah. So that's been a pretty cool rabbit hole to go down. Yeah, I think some of the strangest ones I went down was I ended up down this rabbit hole of researching about cows and different breeds of cows. Sick. All I had to do for the design task was to put a cow in this design, but no, I went down the rabbit hole. But it still serves me today, as in I can identify what different types of cows are used for. So those are the rabbit holes you get to explore that make your life one bit better.
Yeah, I've been doing some recent rabbit holes yesterday. In fact, satellite dishes, not particularly news ones, but just generally, and just realizing about. I'm still just at the edge of the rabbit hole, but I'm peering down it, like, you know, definitely about to fall in. But that's quite interesting. And for yourself though, like, because I've always found, and I remember being told this quite early on in my education, like, this is even before uni, that it's great that you can come up with these ideas, but you get lost in them. And that's something that I've always like kind of had in the back of my mind, like as a warning sign. Like the red light comes on saying, warning, you're getting lost again. And I have to kind of like rein that in. But when you are like in the research phase, or like you said, like, let's take, you know, for example, the broadcast vans, for example, do you have like a process when you kind of know you've got enough and then you kind of just head out with the stuff that you've gathered, or does it vary from time to time? Like, what's your relationship like when it comes to, I guess, just getting lost in research? And do you even get lost in research?
So I think because I've always been freelance, I've always had to be very wary of time, and how I use time, and allocating the right amount of time to certain tasks. So I think it is easy for me to get lost in research. And one thing that I work with is I have I use an app called Toggle, but Toggle without an E, and it does like the Pomodoro breaks, and I can track my time based on different tasks. So I tend to allocate a set amount of time for research, and I will normally, before I even start looking at images, I will have like this list of questions that I have to write down answers to. So it then helps to make my research very directed, in the sense that I can still go broad with it, but I want to make sure I answer those questions with the images that I'm looking for. And I'm not looking for the images to answer the questions. So I've already answered the question before I start looking for images. And I think that has been a big help, because, you know, there's, for example, with the broadcasting brands, the designs that I'm looking to sort of steer towards, I want to have advertisement on the side that moves. So it's almost like LED advertising that just keeps changing and changing and changing. So I would be very specific then when I'm looking for research, to look for things that represent that, rather than be like, oh, well, let me look at 6 possibilities of what I could have on the side of the van, and then it just takes so much longer. Also being very specific with what theme I'm going with, or what I want the shape language to be. So then that already cuts out some of the craziness of the rabbit hole. The rabbit hole normally happens like when I'm tired and I'm just like, I don't want to design anymore, so I'm just going to read about random stuff.
Okay.
That tends to be more where the rabbit hole comes in. But yeah, and I think, as I was saying, being freelance, sometimes it has meant that I've been given permission to spend longer on research. And sometimes I've just had to like spend half a day research, and then I just have to go, and you get to a point where you're just like, well, I have to just make sure the research is quality. So it's a quality half a day's research, rather than faffing about and looking at images that you don't need to be looking at. So that tends to be where I lie on it. It's like I can direct it quite well, so I don't waste time.
And regarding organization in general, like, is that something have you always been like that, or is that something you've kind of learned along the way?
I've always been like that. I think it's one of the like, for me being autistic, like, structure is my thing. Like, I need structure, I need order. So it works quite well in when you're trying to organize yourself, especially when you're freelancing. So it's kind of like, I know that I have tasks. So if I'm going to break down a brief, I know there's like a checklist of things I need to do to break down that brief at the different stages. So like thumbnail stage, I'll know what to do. Development stage and refinement stage and final. So that structure is just something that I just keep building on. And, you know, as you find more tools or different software that can help you do it more efficiently, then it changes over time. But yeah, I'm a structure person. I will be flexible, but when I need structure, structure is there.
I find it fascinating. Yeah. My wife's very similar to yourself. Like, she is incredibly structured, and like, she would do tasks, like you said, like almost like you described it, like, you know, structure it first before she does it. I am definitely not anti-structure, but my structure is very more abstract, and it only exists in here. And the only software that can understand it is inside here. Otherwise, if I had to explain to somebody else, it would just look like complete nonsense. And I'm someone who has not an unhealthy battle, but I'm still battling with trying to, especially like things like Toggle and other apps and stuff. Like, I try my best to make it work, but in the end, I just go for my default proprietary software in my brain and kind of figure it out that way. So I'm always fascinated by like the structured process. However, that's like with a bit like my creative process. And if I know what needs to be done, then I'll happily lean on my weird way of doing things. Yet, when it comes to, like, say, working for a client or for a company, for example, if they have a specific structure, I will almost absorb it and rely on it like very heavily, and like use that and in a weird way like adapt to whatever they need, kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know, I have no point in that regard, but I just like just trying to like figure out how my relationship is with, I guess, organizing and tools, for example, especially with clients and any companies and stuff. Like, I've worked at non-creative companies where they have like a very set way of doing things, and if that's like how it needs to be done, I'll happily lean towards that. But I know with the creative process, like, there are multiple rules, so I'm always fascinated by people's approaches with that. I know like some are very much like me, who it's hard to kind of explain like how it kind of maps out and the topology of it, so to speak. And then for yourself, like, it's very like, I guess, more structured and more clear how it works. But with that, like you said, you kind of did say you do it as well. Like, how does it work where you have to adjust things? Like, is it something where you kind of like have to know things in advance and then you can readjust, or do you kind of do it on the fly? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the size of the adjustment. There's a lot of things, I think, as you get more experience, you'll be able to adjust as you go. Whether it's with client requests or with just something that you just have to change because of time. But I think with bigger requests, as early as possible is probably what helps me the most. Especially if it's something which has a knock-on effect to things later on. So for example, if you're working with a client and they change their mind about one very specific part of the design direction, and then that means, okay, so now it means like I have to do another set of research in the direction that they want, like that, as early as possible for that is best. But I think for me, having some structure means that when that stuff does crop up, I can be like, okay, well, I know I need to go back to step number, and then start from there and figure out what the new order of things will be. So I guess that's where I was saying, like, being flexible, like structure, but with flexibility.
Yes,
is
for
helpful.
sure. Now, obviously, the design process is like a whole thing, but there's many different parts. One of them is, like you said, the research and development stage. For you, though, how critical is it with the way you approach a project, like with the planning and, like you said, asking the right questions and knowing things and what the parameters are? How valuable is that for you? Because I'm sure we've all had it, like, where you've had the projects where you get the information, you don't get no information, then it all changes like halfway through, last minute as well. But I guess how important is that overall? Do you think it is the make or break before you even start making any, like pen marks or anything, or deliver any designs? Do you think that's where a project is made? Like, it lives or dies in the planning stage, or, like that kind of phase?
I think the level of success is massively influenced by the research, because I think we can have in our heads what we think something might look like. And actually, when you actually do way more research, you realize there's way more variety than you could have ever imagined.
Yes.
And also there's maybe a different the design direction that you can propose to what maybe the clients ask for. So I think research is incredibly important. And I think that's something that I try and bring across to every aspiring concept artist or junior that I come across, is that, like, the research is where you get everything or most of what you need to carry you through on the project. If you do good research at the beginning, you often don't need to then jump back onto Pinterest or Tumblr or wherever, like, partway through the project and find more images, because you've got that solid research in the beginning. I mean, there's many times when I've been asked to design something and the person has in their mind, they're like, right, we want it to look specifically like this. And I'm like, okay. And then I'll go away and do some research and I'll find some way cooler stuff. and then I'll send it back to them and be like, you said that, you said you want it to look like A, but here are some other options that I found. And you share that with them, and often they're like, actually, that is way cooler. Actually, and then that prompts more inspirational thinking from them, and it really just helps people to see that, I don't know, I think what's in our brain is very limited to what's out there when we start to do research.
Yeah.
And I think research helps us to get excited as well, like way more excited than we would be if we just relied on what's in our brain.
Yes, I totally agree. I remember at school, only because it was the way they want, and I'm talking about like, you know, pre-high school, even in school, when you got exams or whatever, like if it's something that I'm not interested in, or just is not on my radar at all, or I almost don't care about it, it's torturous for me to want to know about it. Versus if it's something that I have even like a small inkling of interest, I will give unholy amount of hours towards it and understand it and do these deep dives and stuff. So that's cool to hear, because like I found that research, like yourself, is almost critical to making something, to use like, I guess, like, you know, simple terms, awesome. Like something awesome, you need to put a lot of energy into it, and that energy you got to harvest it from somewhere. And I think research is a nice way to do it. Regarding research itself, you said like you spend some time before you even start sketching or designing, whatever. Like, how long do you take on average? I know it can vary project to project, but how long do you spend on the research phase overall?
Probably a day at minimum. And it also depends how new the subject area is to me, or the theme. Because like, I remember when, so like if I was designing something that's very like, I don't know, a set decoration piece, or like a background prop, which is kind of like based on something I might come across every day. So let's say, for example, a chair, and it doesn't have to be crazy elaborate or anything. That to me requires a little less research normally than something where it's like, okay, we need you to look at, I don't know, let's say Vikings, and then we want you to combine it with, I don't know, Art Deco, and then it's just like, well, these are two very big spheres that I don't have massively deep knowledge about, so I'm going to have to like go and spend some time doing a lot of research. And I guess another thing that determines the amount of research I do is also how easy it is to find the images that I need. So, for example, if I'm researching something which is, there is a lot of content available online, then it's pretty easy for me to just find the images that I need. Where if it's something where I have to do a deep dive and maybe take screenshots from videos and such, then it's a lot harder for me to find what I need. So it takes a little bit longer. So I think sometimes it's just like gauging at the beginning of a project, how much effort you're going to have to put into the research based on what you're asked to do. So I think for projects, for example, Secret Invasion, sometimes I'd be given like half a day to do research, and then there's other times when I'd be given like a full day to do research, just depending on what was needed and how deep dive they wanted me to go with the research.
Sick. And regarding gathering research, obviously for your project, so you've got your themes, your topics, or whatever your brief is. Do you have a mood board? Are you a mood board kind of person? Do you store it all mentally, or do you just make notes? I'm very curious to hear that, because I think each one and each way is equally valid. And yeah, I just find this topic fascinating. So forgive me if I'm spending too much time on this, but I do find it cool, especially to see how fellow creatives like think and get to their creative process. But yeah, what do you do with the research afterwards? Like, how you disseminate it all, and how do you use it in ways that really help you to knock it out the park?
Yeah, sure. I love talking about research. I think it's underrated sometimes. I tend to collect both images and I will write notes and I will collect websites. So I tend to use a cross between, I'll use PureRef, and I'll also use Miro. So I like Miro because it's a whiteboard, so I can add sticky notes, I can paste web addresses on there and get back to them easily. I can do flowcharts, I love flowcharts. And I just love having that sort of whiteboard feel to it.
Yeah.
PureRef I love for gathering or maintaining the image size and quality, because with Miro, when you paste it on to then, you can't just copy and paste the image back if you want to use it like in Photoshop. You have to download the image and it's already been compressed. So you kind of lose some of that when you add it to Miro. And I tend to have both up at the same time. So I'll have PureRef and I'll be moving around that board, zooming in, zooming out. And for Miro, I'll have it up and then I'll flick back to it every so often to remind myself of some stuff. So as I mentioned before about the questions that I ask myself, I have all those on Miro and I've got them like with bold text and then like it's all formatted so it looks pleasing to the eye, and then like loads of sticky notes in different colours. So it's easy for me to like look at it quickly and be like, okay, am I on the right track? And no or yes. And I tend to group my reference images. I don't know if anyone else does this, but I group them based on different criteria. So say, for example, if I'm designing a weapon, I might group all the images that I think could be good influence for the handle together, and then I'll group all the ones that might be good influence for the trigger, and others for barrel, and then I'll just have like a general aesthetic group. I'm like, this is just the vibe that I want to go for. So that's generally how I break down my reference.
Sick. And with like, say, your Miro boards or PureRef, do you have one for each project, or do you have like some that almost reusable? Like, do you kind of hoard some and think, okay, that's going to be good in a universal aspect, and do you just bring them back often? Or is it more a case of specific every time you start something?
So I think if it's an overall project, then I'll use a new board, just because I find it cleaner. But within the project, for all the design tasks, I keep it on the same board. So basically just have project boards. And then what I'll do is, if I found images online that I find really interesting, that I think I would potentially want to use again later, I will add them to a Pinterest board that is relevant to where I feel like it would be good to categorize them. Just because I think it's sometimes it's really hard to think, oh, okay, I'm definitely going to use this, not going to use this image again. But sometimes if you come across something interesting, like, okay, I can use it for this, but I'll add it to Pinterest just in case. And it's there if I need it. And, you know, Pinterest, it's not like it's stored on your hard drive, so it can save a lot of space. So that's generally how I think about that. I think I do have reference images on the hard drive, but I think sometimes it's just easier just to quickly jump in Pinterest and like scroll through and say, yep, that's the one. And here's the website I got it from. Okay, here we go.
Yes. What about, so we mentioned like, I guess like some of the tools you use to disseminate the research and references. What about your reference sources? Like, do you have go-to places, or again, is it project specific? So wherever the project needs, you will go to that particular place and hunt for it. Is it a case of like supermarket, you know which aisle has your things and you just go straight for number 14 or whatever?
So I actually, it does largely depend, but there is a few websites or categories of websites that I'll often go back to. So, like one that I love to go back to is like auction sites. Like, I'm not talking eBay, but like the more like high-end auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's auction houses, because they have such cool items, and then you have really good views of them because they have good quality photos. Museums, I love to look at museum websites and scroll through and see what I can find. I tend to have, there's a few photographers that I have for anything to do with like military, because they have very high quality photos and good variety. And I tend to, so for nature stuff, I have the person that I look to for insects. There's a guy he's a photographer called Nicky Bay, and he always finds really interesting insects and just like really cool macro shots of them. So that's my first thing if I want to look at like cool insects. Yeah, there's like a massive variety. Flickr. Oh my gosh, Flickr is so underrated. If you don't use Flickr for your research, like
I remember when you just said that for yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, Flickr's great. Like you could be tasked with a design brief, and it can feel really random to you. And you can search it on Flickr, and you'll find that there's a group where people collect this type of photos. So that's one of the things I love about Flickr, because they're not necessarily professional photos. So you'll get like the more raw photos of an object, or a person, or a scene, or a culture that is way different to like the ones that you'll see in like Nat Geo or on Shutterstock or Getty Images. So yeah, I do love some of the raw stuff that's on Flickr, like just unedited, just take it as you see it photos.
Yes.
Yeah, and
totally.
Yeah. What about you? Have you found like there's a go-to website for you when you're doing a project?
No. I will it depends on the project. Like obviously there are certain things that like you end up in the same place. So I always find that I might end up in the same place or whatever, but usually I almost start from scratch every time. Obviously, I know in the back of my mind, okay, there's that person will do this, or this will do that, or that will be there. For example, if I'm looking at like racing stuff, motorsport.com has a great photography section, especially the F1 stuff, because it takes pictures of every single day. And for the first few days before the race, it's all of the cars stripped down and in various states of assembly. And obviously they have like high level tools. So it's very bespoke, super cool, super slick. You don't see any grease marks anywhere, which is crazy considering how much mechanics is there. So that's one, obviously. That's always one that I go to for like, okay, let's just see, because with F1 cars, how tightly packaged they are and almost shrink wrapped in the machinery and stuff, it's just pure, like, it's the perfect thing for like, I guess, mechanical design or futuristic design. That kind of makes sense because it has to make sense. So that's one I'd say obviously default to. But yeah, it's interesting because I'm on the opposite. I will hoard images. So if I see an image, I will save it. I will save them. I've got folders and pictures that I've taken that I haven't opened for years. But like you said before, it was like, okay, but I know I'm might use it one time. And if I need it, it's there. And this could be anything from like, oh, that color looks nice, or that looks all in that light, or that's a new thing that I've never seen before. I like that picture, or whatever. You go wild. Back to what I said about my abstract way of thinking things. I don't label them, but I know it's there. So I'll just go and get it. And then when I need it, I know it's there. Or I knew I took it at this kind of month, at this kind of era. I'm just going to scroll there and I'll figure it out. I should be more organized in that regard because I've got too many things. But that leads me to my other point. So with that, all that said, when you're designing stuff, we always have these like constant inspirations that are burnt into us, right? Like they're just etched into your brain, etched into your creative style and the way you do things. So what's etched into your creative brain? Like visually, visual language. We already mentioned Pimp My Ride and the plexiglass. That's definitely etched in there. What about all the other stuff?
I tend to gear a lot to like understanding how basically anything to do with insects and sea life. To me, I just like that is where I can like easily start off as a point of reference. And I think there's just something cool about the way nature has already solved lots of mechanical issues that we are trying to figure out. You just like birds and planes, like birds know how to do it. You just copy birds. So I think like those are like insects and that sort of stuff is normally etched on my brain. And I think, yeah, especially like my early, when I was just starting out, was like trying to figure out how to do concept art. Like insects, I'd be like spiders, get them on the reference board. Like, need to use that as some sort of reference. And I think like because I was going into doing mechs in the beginning as well, like understanding the movements and looking at spider ref for that was great. So I'd probably say like I think because I focused a lot on nature from when I was at university, it was like I want nature to influence every design.
Nice.
And that was kind of like the path that I sort of started on and then just continued on. I probably do it a little less now, but I try and take something from nature. But yeah, it's insects and sea life. It's just like nature's so cool. There's just so much you can like.
Insects and sea life, particularly deep sea ones for me. But yeah, I get you. Like, for example, though, I can't be around creepy crawlies. Like when they're near me, I freak out. And even though I'm the most bravest one in our household regarding spiders, I still hate doing it. But my daughters and my wife hate it, so I got the short straw in that regard. But I can handle them. But if they're on a screen or on a documentary, give me them all day long. It's amazing. But yeah, I think that's a great pick. But that's interesting as well because because a lot of the time when you ask people that question, normally what creeps in is pop culture references or stuff they grew up on. Like, it could be like Batman, for example, or whatever else. So is that the case for you, or is it purely the first thing, or the overriding thing is, like you said, those two topics of like insects and sea life?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think for me it's popular culture. I think
Nice.
Maybe because it's like even now I'm such a I love nature. I love being out in nature, and maybe it's just like from a young age because that was what I liked. Like I could easily not watch TV for days, but I would happily spend time outside. And maybe also traveling when you're younger helps you to just appreciate, for example, being away from a TV and just like seeing the world as it is. For me, I think we like 90s hip hop was my thing when I was a kid. 90s hip hop and R&B. And I don't really feel like that influences my design, apart from what I might listen to while I'm designing. It is definitely more like just the nature side of things.
Wow.
And yeah.
Do you have any particular species or favorite species of insect or sea life?
So I think beetles are I really just I think they're just so cool. And I did go down the deep dive, another deep dive, one time of like different caterpillars because they all look so different. And there's there's like some that like are full of like spikes, and you're like you wouldn't even know that's a caterpillar if you walk past it. And like that you could just spend a whole year designing based off different caterpillars and letting that influence your design. So yeah, I think the insects, mostly like I love like spiders and looking at those and how they all have different number of eyes and how just they have such a sinister look to them. And what makes it look so sinister, like all that sort of stuff is really interesting for me. So I'd say like it flicks, but mostly like I'll tend to gravitate towards beetles in the beginning, and then when I'm doing research, and then I'll start to spread to other insects.
And regarding caterpillars, for example, have you seen how they breathe or how their airway works?
No.
It's worth checking out, but it's the cool thing about, I think, especially insects, which is what I'm sure it'd be the same for yourself, as why I think they're cool and why it inspires so many people, is because they're obviously not mammals, so they operate in very different ways, different mechanisms, for example. And they almost force air in through their exoskeleton. It's I'm not explaining it right, but it's definitely not how we breathe. Like, I don't think they have like lungs the way we have lungs, and like they've kind of forced air in. And I remember watching a documentary where they kind of showed it in. They just showed the mechanism of it, and I just thought, well, that's super alien. That's super cool. That's a cool design. And yeah, and then like obviously with the exoskeletons and stuff, it's just biomechanics, and it's the perfect inspiration for anything mechanical. But yeah, that's a cool thing to nerd out on, how insects breathe. It's crazy.
Yeah. It sounds really interesting. And like that was what I was saying before about you learn something new and then you're like, oh what, like this is a new design opportunity. And I think that's like for me it's like where I like say to people that I talk to, it's like there's so much that we can learn from research. Like why neglect it at the beginning if it can make your design way more interesting, because there's just so much fun to be had. Like going to museums and nerding out, looking at stuff like who else gets to do that as a part of their job?
Oh no, for sure, I agree. That's what one cool thing I like about it as well. Like, obviously, we have times where you dwell about like the importance of things that you do, and this is probably one of the fewer jobs. Maybe writing is something similar as well, where you do get to kind of, I guess maybe in a fantasy way or whatever, but almost in a design sense, literally can take on like any job. Like you can one day be an archaeologist, one day be, you know, anthropologist or into insects or biology or science or physics or whatever. Obviously, sometimes, at least in my case, very basic and unqualified terms, but enough to trigger an idea, to explore and to escape in that kind of realm and then manifest it into some squiggles that I guess hopefully will come across cool or communicate really well. I'd like to know how your creativity was growing up. So all these things that you mentioned, were these, because like you said, you've been like quite structured and organized almost forever. Have you always been like this? Like when was what was your early memories of like drawing or creating? Like when did you kind of know you are a designer and you wanted to make that a living?
So as a kid, I was definitely the arty one. I was so in primary school, I was banned from the art table because I would spend all my time there. My mum had to go into school and have a word with the teacher and be like, well, if she gets her work done, surely she can spend time at the art table. But my mum was a big influence growing up, like a big supporter of just creative expression. So most Saturdays, she'd lay out this brown plastic cloth on the carpet and she'd give us some design or creative art thing that we would do, like activity. Some holidays we would go to art galleries and museums, and there was always just something creative happening in our house. And I remember distinctly as probably in year 3 in school, and then they had like the paper plate competition at Christmas, which would basically take a paper plate and the kids would design a Christmas scene on it. And I remember like the amount of energy I put into designing this snowman with the kids putting the hat on, like that was the level of love I had for design. I won the competition that year.
Sick.
So I think like it paid off those Saturdays. So I think it's always been there, like the love for design, the love for art, the love for creativity. But I've just been fortunate to have support that's helped me nurture it and grow it and encourage me to keep pursuing it. Because I think it's so easy once you get to like high school and the focus is on math, science, English, and it's kind of like art takes the back seat, or kind of like, you kind of do that to relax, and not really a career you can go down. And you have to, essentially, unless you're really passionate and you have the support from your family, you have to really kind of fight against that to let it still have a level of importance in your life, as aside from it just being like something you do as a session once a week in class. So that's the sort of shaping that my love for art had at an early age.
Oh, that's amazing. And fast forward to now, has that always been there? And that has carried you? Like, is that almost like, obviously it's the basis of the foundation of how you built your career so far, but is that kind of like passion still there, or did it kind of waver at any point in that journey?
So it definitely wavered. It wavered in 2020. As we all know, there's a lot that was going on in the world at the time, but the way it impacted me was that I ended up experiencing depression. And I started to question, actually, do I even want to be a concept artist anymore? And like, is this a career for me? And it was probably one of the distinct moments where I realized I was like, I just don't know if I can design anymore. And I think because also just having, the creative expression stripped back of, like, say, going to a museum or traveling, like having that taken away from you, it's almost like that is the influence and that's what feeds you as a designer. and an artist. So yeah, there's a lot of questioning that happened at that stage, and um, thankfully I got through it. But it is like, for me, yeah, I'm very open about the fact that like it's not all blue skies. And I think as we go through different seasons in our life as well, when we face different obstacles, we start to question, actually, am I a designer? Can I keep doing this? Is this for me? How long can I keep going? And I think it's important to ask those questions of yourself and to like stick with it and be like, actually, and to kind of wrestle with it. Because it's really easy to dismiss it and be like, no, I'll be fine. Let me just find another job to work on. But actually to sit with it and wrestle with it and to be like, but then to come out of it and be like, have the answer to the questions and see where that takes you. So yeah, that's probably the biggest moment I had of like questioning my career and artistic ability.
I mean, you mentioned about coming out of it, and I think that is obviously the key phase. Only because it's. I'm glad that you have, because I know like being in there is not pleasant at all, as you can attest to. But it also kind of like closes that chapter, makes you realize what you need to realize. Like you said, whether you questioned whether you want to do something. This obviously can apply to anything, not just being an artist or a designer. Could be anything in life. And then at least you got some kind of closure within yourself, and then you can move forward. But not putting light on any struggles that you had, are you grateful for that experience and going for that chapter and then coming out of it?
I think in some senses, yes. So at the same time as I was going through that struggle, and because I didn't have work that year, I decided to go and do a part-time degree, a part-time graduate diploma in theology. And that has been something which has actually fueled my love for design more. So I'm grateful in that sense, because I've got to, have a more deeper understanding of why the art that we look at from like the Renaissance looks the way it does, and why it's in churches and what that means. And that has just been really interesting as somebody who looked at the masters when I was trying to figure out, looked at the art masters when I was trying to figure out like how to, paint and understand colour theory and composition. So that's been really interesting. And I think that going through the period of depression allowed me to talk to openly and honestly to other artists and aspiring artists and just anyone really. I'm quite open about it and be like, this is life. Like, this is what we go through. Working in the creative industries, there's a lot of pressure on us. And if we are in a bad headspace, it's so much harder to create than I'd say some other careers where you can almost be on like autopilot. Whereas creatives, if we're given a design task and we're facing depression and experiencing that, there's a big part of translating the task that we've been given, translating it in our brain and expressing ourselves on paper that's missing. So I'm grateful that I've come through it, been able to talk about it, but also now I'm very aware of like when I have those moments, if I feel like I'm slipping and I'm going down a spiral, or if I can see someone else displaying the same sort of characteristics and I guess like symptoms of depression that I started to have, or someone in the danger zone of like spending 12 hours a day doing art and not socializing and being isolated, like I can point that out, I can call it out and say like, look after yourself, because art isn't the end of the world. I'm grateful in that sense. It's been helpful.
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up perfectly there. Like, I don't know if it's correct, but once you've experienced it, you can see the signs in yourself and others. Maybe like for myself, I didn't see the signs beforehand, but I could definitely see it in others, but I couldn't see it in myself. But when I saw it in myself, I saw it, I could recognize it, and then I could, okay, fair enough, this is what's happening, and that's it. You have this incomplete equation, and then you pop that in there and go, oh, now that's what's working.
Exactly.
But for yourself, do you know what brought it on? Or was it particularly the 2020, the pandemic, the shutdown, or was it the extreme and abrupt change of circumstances that kind of let it come out in you. So I guess what I'm asking is, A, do you know what caused it? And B, if 2020 never happened in that way, do you think you would have just, I guess, maneuvered through life normally and that wouldn't have happened for you? If that makes sense.
I think it was a mixture of so many things that
Okay.
happened in 2020. So obviously like the shutdown and everything. And for me, it was like a massive change in routine. Um, and not being able to do like the things that I love to do. Like go to like events and hang out with people and like having all that taken away and shut down and I guess not having work as well. And not knowing, I guess like one of the big things is not knowing when the circumstances that we were in was all going to end. Like we had no end date. It wasn't like this is a 6 month thing. Okay, after 6 months, we'll all be fine. It was like we just didn't know. And for me, I was like, I think that was possibly one of the things which contributed to me thinking like, can I actually be an artist anymore? Like, if this shutdown continues, like, how is that going to influence my future? And I think so. I think if 2020 didn't happen and all those circumstances weren't piling on, I think I would have. I think I would have been in a different place. But I feel like there is so much that's come through, like the struggle of 2020 personally for me. Like one of the big things was me finding my voice as like a mentor. And somebody who does talks to schools and colleges and unis, and that wouldn't have come out of me if 2020 hadn't happened the way it did for me. So like that's been a beautiful thing because like that's one of the things I absolutely love and still do to this day. And I feel like that would have been missing if maybe 2020 didn't happen because we could do virtual mentoring, for example.
Yeah.
Whereas before, a lot of it was like London based and being in Manchester, it's like not really practical. And virtual talks in colleges and unis. So it's like it created opportunities for me in that sense.
Awesome. Regarding your career, I'd love to get to your chapter, I guess, in your career about your talks, but we haven't spoken about your career yet. So when did your career take off, so to speak? Obviously, I always firmly believe that if you're creative, the moment you start creating, that's when your career begins. Like it's something that you cannot turn off. You can mute it, you can kind of pretend it doesn't exist, but once that noise starts, it's always there. But I guess in world terms, as a career, as a professional, when did all that begin? Did it happen straight after uni or even during uni?
I'm just going to change my camera batteries just
Cool.
before we start
No
this,
worries,
just
no
in
worries,
case
no worries.
it decides to cut out. So my career, so when I finished university in 2013, 2012, 2013, I was like, okay, I have to pursue this concept art role. And I remember coming out of uni and just being really burnt out on designing cars. I was like, I never want to design a car ever again. And I designed everything else apart from cars from that moment. I was like, I'm going to learn anatomy. I'm going to learn figure drawing. I'm going to learn environments. I just did not want to do anything to do with cars. I was so burnt out of vehicles. And it took me like a year and a half, and I'm just grinding just to get a job in the industry as in the games industry or film and TV. But it was like trying to do that on your own when I don't think there was ArtStation at that point. So I don't think there was ArtStation, possibly. There was YouTube tutorials, but there wasn't like as well as there is now. Trying to figure that out, and then I decided to apply. Like after a year and a half, I applied TT Games here in Manchester to work as a QA tester. So they make the Lego video games. So got that job. Worked as a tester in for Lego Dimensions, Lego Star Wars, and then I also was seconded to visual effects. for Lego Marvel Avengers. And during that time, I got to actually understand about game development because, you know, doing transport design doesn't mean that you have any idea about the game development process. Yeah. So I kind of had to learn that. And it was so helpful. Like I think going into that role as a QA tester allowed me to just see everything, like how animation affects the game, how visual effects affects the game, and how environment design affects the game. So it was really an interesting way to learn about game development. And I loved finding bugs in the game. Like it was just so much, for me, it was so much fun. And so I left after like a year and a half because I still had in my mind, like, I want to be a concept artist and I need to pursue that. So I left in 2016 and then I was like, okay, I need to get a studio job now as a concept artist. And actually a friend said to me, like, why don't you just go freelance? And I was like, okay. And I did. And then the ironic thing is the first freelance job I got was designing vehicles. So like I ran from it after I came out of uni, and then that was the first job I got. And it was actually doing a basically like pimp my ride sort of artwork for someone. So it was like kind of came full circle.
Nice and poetic.
And then yeah, exactly. And that was like how I got into freelance, and then how the journey actually started. So it's like I said at the beginning, it wasn't like a linear thing in terms of went to university and did a game design degree, and then it was all great from there. It was like I did a QA in between. I definitely think doing that job added so much value to how I design now and how I think of how would this work in a game. So like that role was a lot of fun and a good learning experience as well.
Awesome. And at that time, obviously, like this is 2013, 2014?
When I came up uni, it would have been 2012, 2013.
Okay.
And then when I finished at TT Games, it would have been 2016.
Ah, cool. So that was, for me at least anyway, where it was the era of like seeing all the different tools, the different softwares. And I know it was for uni, but was it more like sketching traditionally, a bit of Photoshop and Alias, or maybe a bit of Maya? Was that how it was at uni for you?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Like I think there seemed to lean more eventually to the Photoshop, creating the image in Photoshop. So, and I was just decided I didn't want to use Photoshop, and I refused to use it and used Corel Painter. That was my software of choice.
And obviously, at that era, it was like there's a lot of new tools, like discovering things like Fusion 360 and Houdini and all these other things. It's the whole world of like, you know, software tools, 3D tools, whatever. What was that impact like on you in your development as an artist? Like, did you want to try every single thing out there, or were you still quite specific in picking your tool and knowing what you wanted to use?
So I think I stuck with Corel Painter for like such a long time, probably longer than I should have done, because I don't think I was using it effectively. But I used to do a lot of like painting still live. So like for me, I was like, I'm a painter. That is the software I'm going to use. I'm not going to design vehicles. So I kind of focused on Corel Painter. I think I also use 3ds Max. So as you know, at university, doing car design, I want to use Alias so you can get the surfaces right. Yeah. I learned in second year and was like, I'm never using this again. It's horrible. Like, I just don't get it. So then I was like, even for my final year master's project, I was like, I'm using 3ds Max, and that is what I used. And also because I knew that was what the games industry was using, I was like, I need to use it. And it made more sense to me anyway, to design in. So those were probably the two software that I really focused on coming out of university. And then I did try Fusion 360 because it had more of the industrial designer feel to it. I used it for a while, and then I was like, I don't think this is for me. And then I think maybe after I got my job at TT, I then got Photoshop and started to use Photoshop a lot more. But it's actually interesting because reflecting on this recently is that when I was in high school, so sixth form, I actually was like using Photoshop, and I'd create like just random images on it and mess about in IT class.
Yeah.
But then I just dropped off using it for a while. So it's kind of like I had this Photoshop knowledge from like an early age, but then just didn't use it for the whole of uni. I was stubbornness. So yeah. But I think I'd because I love traditional sketching. That was mostly what I did a lot of my work in, like sketching, and then I'd use digital as like maybe like 20% of my workflow. I just really loved like traditional sketching.
And what's your tool set now?
So I use Photoshop still, and Blender, and I've been asked to, it's been recommended for me to try out Quick Studio Paint, so I'm going to give that a go at some point. But those are probably the two that I focus on. Photoshop, I am very familiar with, and I sort of, because my work just sometimes use quite a lot of photos, I find it's really helpful for me, because when I had to make that transition from learning Corel Painter to learning Photoshop, one of the sources which accelerated my learning ridiculously, and I think was a big influence on me getting my first job, was Flern. I don't know if you've heard of Flern. No. It was at the time, it was they had a few videos on YouTube, but it's basically like learning Photoshop, but from the point of view of like being a photographer and a photo retoucher. So with somebody who does like photo bashing, like, that is like so ideal. So I did so much. I did their courses for like 2 years, and I learned about photo compositing, and then adjusting colors and making sure the hue saturation matches on all these images that you might mesh together. And so like that was a big learning point for me, that then I just became like, I actually understood what I was doing in Photoshop. As opposed to like, there's this tool over here, I don't know what it does, so we'll just leave that alone, and I'll stick with the brush tool. Like, I was able to like be like, okay, this is why we use curves, and then this is why you might switch to a different channel. And so understanding the why basically of some of the stuff in Photoshop. So so I'm still Photoshop, and Blender, and then I do most of my work in Photoshop. Switch to Blender if I need to do a 3D block out. But I think most of my work is in Photoshop. But apart from when I worked for GadgetBot, who with them I worked on Battlefield Mobile and PUBG and Apex. The workflow that they had there was quite heavy on 3D, so it was like doing the concept design in 3D. So my Blender skills went up massively, and that was a real change to how I would previously work, where it was like mostly Photoshop. So it's I guess like my workflow and the software I use can adjust based on what I'm asked to do, but mostly like Photoshop is where I'm at.
And are there any things tool-wise that you see out there that you want to add to it, or are you content with what you're using right now?
I think at the moment I'm content, because I'm the type of person who likes to, if I learn something new, I will just go hard and try and learn it as much as I can. And I think with Blender, there's so much to learn, and to use it different ways. And with every update, there's something new added. And so for me, if I'm designing a certain type of object, I might not use Blender, or I might use Blender differently. So it's kind of like getting really comfortable with that, to the point where I'll be like, oh, I feel like I have the capacity now to like try it on other pieces of software, and see how that goes. But it's kind of like, there is so much opportunity out there to learn new software, but it's time. As you're probably aware.
I agree. And it is cool. I think it's very inspiring to hear when you see a creative who are set on their tool sets, and they're not, and that's it. And it's like, I am the opposite. I will see something and I have more restraint now, and I'll be like, okay, don't worry, we'll get there. We'll try it one of the days. But realistically, inside, I want to open it, try it, mess around with it, and then maybe reach nowhere with it, and then move on, go back to what I was using before. I'm always drawn to that. I don't know what it is. But equally, I always default back to what I know, which is pen and paper and a bit like yourself, like Photoshop and 3D. And that's it. But yeah, I do have to kind of like rein it in. So I do respect when you have, like, using game terms, you kind of know what weapons you're going to use. You go for that every single time.
Yeah.
And that's it. Whereas I'll be like, okay, let me try this one. Let me try that one. Let me try that one. And still get my ass kicked.
But it's the marketing of these softwares that makes it so enticing. You're like, I could just play around with this and see. But I guess that's good, because sometimes through trying a different piece of software, it can open your eyes to how you could approach solving a design problem back in your original software, just using a slightly different technique. So it's not to say it's wasted your experimentation at all.
Oh no, for sure. I just know that the time taken to experiment, that can be quite not good, because it's a big time drain. And yes, I'm appeased, but my priorities are not. So I have to kind of like rein in, and that's one of the reasons why I had to stop gaming for a while, because I know when I'm onto something, I will be on it unhealthy amount of times, and priorities are put secondary, and that's not good. But I'm gonna learn that lesson, because God knows where I'd be if I didn't. Regarding freelance, so you've been freelance since. How have you found being freelance? So I'm in the same boat. My career as a concept artist has begun and always has been freelance. So I'll let you run with it how you want to explain it. But specific questions from myself, what I'd love to know is, do you want to stay freelance? Did you ever think about not being freelance? And just any kind of things that really like kind of, I guess, are important for you as to why you're a freelancer.
So I have thought sometimes, like, would I want to go and work in a studio full time? But I think because I'm such a night owl, and my best ideas, like my design thinking really gets going from like 2:30 in the afternoon onwards.
2 a.m. then I was like, wow.
Yeah, that would be serious night owl energy. I feel like that is like one of the things where I'd be like, you know, I could do it for a short amount of time, you know, work the 9 to 5 or the 8 till 6. But I think at the end of the day, like I know that I work better at night. So in order to accommodate that, it's either going to be freelance or working for a studio that's in a different time zone, and then you would have to adhere to their time zone. And I also like the flexibility of freelance, because you know, life is life, and it doesn't happen outside of the 9 to 5. It happens sometimes in the 9 to 5, and just being able to accommodate that is so valuable to me. And I think also just the flexibility that you have with freelance, in terms of, if I wanted to, I could say no to a potential client if I didn't feel like it matched my values, or it just wasn't something that I feel like I'd be able to do justice with. And also, you know, I just love like the fact that if I wanted to, I could take a week off, and I don't need to speak to my manager. I can just be like, right, I need to take a week off. I need to recover, rejuvenate, whatever, etc. And yeah, or I could go out and work in another part of the UK if I wanted to, or just like that flexibility is what I love. And I think for me, freelancing allows me to fit all the other things like mentoring and or doing, like, going to a university and doing a talk, which I feel like would be harder to do if I was in an office or a studio. So I was doing a 9 to 5 or an 8 till 6. But I think, so when I worked for Marvel, like, I was in a studio, and that was great. But I had the flexibility of, like, I'd be there for, like, I think it was more or less like 2 weeks, sometimes 3, and then I get to come back to Manchester and work from home for a bit. and then I'd go back again. So I had that like hybrid working away from the office sort of system going. But but the full freelance life is where I'm at now, and I'm still enjoying. And yeah, there's so much good stuff that comes from it for me that I love. Obviously, with negatives as well, but
What are the negatives?
Well, you have to do your own pension. It's all like you have to wear so many hats, right? Like It's not like you're just, when you work full time for a company, you're like, well, they've sorted pension benefits out, and I don't know, holidays, etc. They've worked that out, wages, tax, all that stuff is worked out for you. When you're freelance, you have to put on your marketing hat so you get clients, and you have to put on your finance hat, and then your tax hat, and then also your life organization hat. So that can be like, it comes with more responsibilities being freelance. And you have to create your own benefits because there is no Christmas party for you. So so that is that's some of the downsides to it. But I think I think that's where for me there is such an importance on seeing or having a life outside of work, because otherwise, like as I was saying, like when you're freelancing, work from home, there is no Christmas party. But if you have a community that's maybe outside of the art community that you can go and hang out with, you are able to get that sort of interaction and be re-energized by being with other people, even though you work from home. So, some of the downfalls, but you can work around them, I think.
No, of course. And me having like compared both, although I haven't worked in a studio creatively, I've worked for companies and been an employee in that regard and had to deal with all that kind of stuff. And I agree with you in all the pros and cons. Definitely anything you do has a pros and cons. Like there's not one which is perfect, unless you're a billionaire, I guess. Maybe it's different. But it's like, like you'll know yourself which one's right for you. And I know some people who definitely would prefer to be, I guess in creative terms, like be in a studio, equally be freelance. But if you ever, unless you're definitely fully content, then that's fine. But I would always advise people, if you have the opportunity, experience both sides, because then you'll know for sure which one works best for you. Regarding your mentorship side of things, so we spoke about this offline before we began, and when you spoke about it, your face lit up when you were speaking about it. So it's clearly something that you enjoy, and that's something that's important to you. Let me know about that adventure.
Yeah, so in 2020, I had this moment where I was like, I had the sense that I needed to encourage, inspire, and educate people, specifically those from like underrepresented groups. So me being from an underrepresented group as a Black female, I didn't see people in the industry that looked like me. I didn't see concept artists that I could say, oh, that person's doing the job I want to do, and that makes me believe that it's possible for someone like me. And so for me, that meant reaching out to people who were, you'd probably say in the UK, it's like ethnic minorities, or people from low-income families, and people who just felt like they'd been sidelined and marginalised. So I started with Limit Break, actually. So Limit Break do mentoring. It's a scheme here in the UK. I started as a mentor with them, and then I think I joined Into Games, who had video game ambassadors. So they provided lots of opportunities to reach out to people and support different schools and initiatives. And I think they also had mentoring as well. So that started me on the path, and then I ended up applying for a visiting lecturing role with Leeds Arts University. And I got that, and then I started to do more talks for university, and then I was at Yorkshire Game Festival, I think that year, giving portfolio reviews, and I was like, okay, I love this, and I have so much that I've learned along the way in my career that it's be silly for me to keep it to myself and let other people make mistakes and then and not succeed because of that. So it's just something that I've continued, but I've sort of moved away slightly from or help being a part of organizations that do mentoring. And now I just like, if I see someone, I see an artist and I'm like, this person has potential, but they just need someone to say, you need to do this differently, or you need to maybe go back and learn about this thing to help support your work and get you that first job. And so that's what I do. I reach out as much as possible to different people, and I'll be like, hey, do you want to have a call, and let's see if I can help you get to where you want to go. And for me, it's, if I want to support those people who are underrepresented, are marginalized, are oppressed, often they are the people who, it's for them, it's not as easy to afford a mentorship that is like £100 a month, because that's already putting a wall up for them. So I'm like, I don't want to be paid. I just want to help you get to where you want to be, because the industry needs that. We need more diversity. We need games that represent all areas of the beautiful cultures that we have, and just different walks of life. So now I'm at a stage where I still do the visiting lecturing with Leeds University, but other universities as well. I still mentor. I mentor through Prospello, which is a scheme that helps often people like under the age of 16 just talk to a professional and learn a bit about what they do. I do talks in primary schools, high schools, colleges, and yeah, I just love it, because I think, you know, like there is a lot of work that I've been doing with Game Academy, and me and my friend Jensen, who is also a concept artist, and it's incredible to see there are so many people out there who want to get into the games industry but just have no idea of how to get there. And then you talk to them for like an hour, or you do a careers talk, and you're like, hey, this was my journey. It was kind of messy, but you know, we made it. And when you start doing things like that and you see their faces light up and they're like, oh, thank you so much for sharing, like that to me is absolute gold. And I think as an art community, as a creative community, we should be encouraging people to get into the industry, who want to, who are aspiring to, because otherwise, like, the industry just becomes very flat and very boring, with only those who know someone getting into the industry, rather than being as a great mix of it as it could be. So I think that's, you know, one of the things that I love, and I love to do on the side. And I think that it's something that I wish that I had when I was younger. I wish I had someone that come into a high school and say, hey, this career exists out there, like you can pursue it if you want to. Here are some steps to get you started. Like, if I'd had that, I often think how different my career path may have been, rather than trying to do mechanical engineering and then car design, like that sort of thing. And and I love what I've been able to contribute so far, and just when you just see change happening, it's pretty awesome.
Amazing. What are the things that you're seeing across the board? Like, I guess maybe common questions or common obstacles that the people that you're speaking to have or are facing. I mean, like we spoke about earlier, like just trying to get into the industry and not knowing where the entrance was almost, and just finding our way around by feeling around kind of thing. That's one of them. And obviously when you're in, you see a lot of the common pitfalls that artists always make, which is the normal part of growing, where most likely is like lack of fundamentals or not focusing on certain things. But yeah, from your mentorship and your journey with this, obviously this is a little bit different, right? Because there's different obstacles that people are facing, let alone just the technical art ones. So what have you noticed that keeps cropping up?
So I think there is just a lack of understanding of the design process. I think because so much of the artwork that we see online, the concept art we see online, is a final image. It's hard for people to think, how did they get there? There is often this misconception of, we just sat down at a desk and we drew this final image and that was it. And the idea came straight away, 100% nailed it. But actually, what students need to see and what aspiring artists need to see and junior artists need to see is the process, is us doing thumbnails and all the crappy ideas that come out when we're doing that, and then the refining and then developing and then getting to the final. That's what they need to see, because otherwise we just end up with people who are trying to do a final image based off a research board that is very small and that they feel that they can't look at while they're designing because that's cheating. And so they're struggling, trying to work out what they know is in their brain with a limited visual library. They didn't do any thumbnails. There's no development. There's no solving a design problem. There's just a final image that they've put their blood, sweat, and tears into. And then they wonder why they can't get a design job. So I think that's something that I see over and over and over again. And I think it's just a misconception of based on what they're seeing online versus what is the reality of, you know, spending 3 months designing a weapon and it going through a really strenuous process. And also I think one thing that I've seen more and more is just people jumping into 3D and thinking that's going to solve all their problems, but actually not understanding or not having a really deep knowledge of there is a design problem you need to solve in one view before you start jumping into 3D and then trying to solve it in 4 different views. And designing in 3D can be a lot harder than designing on, you know, 2D. So I think those are like the big things I see cropping up again and again. And yeah, I just think it's just something that just has to be communicated more as, you know, if you are an artist in the industry that is that has some years of experience, or you have a voice among people who are aspiring, it's just to tell them, you know, we don't get the idea straight away. We have to sit and go through our process. So I think that's probably a common topic.
Awesome. Final few questions before we wrap up. What do you have in mind or plans for your career moving forward? And are there any changes you want to make, or is it a case of you kind of know what you want to be doing, what you're doing, and it's a case of just cultivating that going forward? How does the future look for you?
So I think because I had that experience of working on TV, it's something that I had forgotten about. So I worked, I think it was like 5 years in games or 4 years in games, basically since I came out of PT Games, working as an artist, and I forgot about the film and TV side of things. And so when I got to work on Secret Invasion, I was like, this is 100%, like, I had forgotten about this and I need to keep pursuing this. And so it is something I want to keep pursuing. It is a direction I want to keep going, because I love the new challenge that working on film and TV poses to you as an artist, because it's so much faster paced, and it's not designing something to be made into a 3D model, it's designing something to be built. So that goes back to our understanding of industrial design. It's like you get to really get into the nitty gritty of that. And I love that. And I really, really, really enjoyed it. So for me, that's what part of the future looks like, is pursuing that. And then there's a side of me at the moment which is delving into some non-art/design stuff. And I don't know how that's going to go. I don't know where it might lead me. But it's kind of like maybe mixing those two together and seeing what that might look like in the future, in the next 5 years. But I don't know. Our industry's changing so much. It's so hard to navigate at the moment with confidence in like what your plans may be. So yeah, I think it's more focused on film and TV for me. And again, keep going with the mentoring and visiting, lecturing, and seeing how that develops as well. But yeah, there's lots going on. So in the background, that is not ready to be in the foreground yet.
I'm looking forward to seeing what that is and how that manifests. And final question, what words do you have for the listeners whilst you wrap up? Final words, sorry.
So I think that it's to take one day at a time. and to focus on your journey. I think it's so easy with having instant access to other people's concept art and seeing other people's journey to get distracted and be like, oh, they've got a job at this studio and they're working on this and look at me. But actually, everyone's starting at a different place. Everyone's journey is going to be different. As me and Aaron have shared, our journeys are different. They have similarities, but they're mostly different. And so everyone's path won't look like yours. And so if you focus on your own lane, I like to give the analogy of a runner. Like if a runner is running and they're focusing on their lane, they'll often run a lot faster than if they're turning and looking at what their competitors are doing on the left and the right. So you kind of just have to focus on your lane and focus on comparing yourself to yourself and be like, okay, in 5 months from now, I want to have achieved this goal. And then you look back in 5 months at your own work, you're like, right, I've made an improvement. So I think that's one of the big things that I'd like to communicate, and just to keep going. Our creative journey is never just a walk in the park. It takes effort and it takes resilience, and it takes for us to sometimes keep pushing even though it seems like you're not moving anywhere, because often you're making more progress than you can actually see yourself. And I guess the final thing I want to say is to make sure you're in an art community. I think design can be lonely, especially if you're working from home or if you're a freelancer, but there is so much power in being in community. So when you're having the days where you feel like crap and you're like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, but you have people that are like, yeah, it's okay, you're feeling that, but you're not going backwards, you're going forwards, and they can encourage you. And also that they can look at your work and give you a good feedback on it, and there are also people to just socialize with and do life with. So yeah, those are probably the 3 things that I would end with.
Incredible, Mel. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for jumping on. A huge thanks to Mel for chatting with me and lending us some incredible insights into the highs and lows of being a creative and how to push forward. Hit the links to see what Mel is up to and to give her a follow. Then when you're done, head to learnsquared.com and start your creative journey today. Remember, all of our first lessons are free. And I've been your host, Aaron Dander. Till next time.